Hi, hi. All right, guys. Egoists versus egotists. What's the difference? So, yesterday I was discussing the fact that our ego is buildable. But then that kind of like, throughout the references that we've heard in our lives, that ego has always been something to destroy, to get rid of. I don't believe that. In all honesty, man, I really believe our interaction with the outside world is through the ego. We ourselves are kind of like segmented somewhere connected to this. And the bigger the connection we have to our ego, the more our presence is in this world. That's why you see people that like it's easy when people identify themselves as something, they kind of like start acting it out or acting out the way they identify themselves. Uh, it is a super powerful thing. Also, it's super dangerous because if you allow yourself to kind of like be identified by something that's not really you, you'll just get carried away and your ego will take over. But your response will always be based on the ego. And so that's why like one of the steps, the first step when you're like an alcoholic is to admit you're an alcoholic and actually just start getting over it. And for me, that approach definitely would work because in the back of your head you're always looking at yourself a certain kind of way and trying to like get out of it, stop how that affects your life. But what if we kind of like build a different ego? And I would go back to the environmental stuff that affect us as human beings, and go all the way back to when America invaded Asia. What was it, Cambodia? And when they invaded Cambodia, a lot of them were hooked on like heroin and were smoking opium like fucking crazy. And there was a big fear that when they come back to the States, they would actually like still be addicts. But the reality is, when they came back to the States, that wasn't the case at all. And the shift in environment kind of like they got more stuff and different stuff to concern themselves with. So that could be a different conversation when it comes to stagnation in our surroundings and how our day-to-day lives, once they become very much monotonous, we kind of like going back to what Dostoevsky said. If you actually give man everything they want, cake all day and chillax and relax and just like do whatever the fuck he wants, the first thing they would do is like destroy the world that they're in order to create some drama and action. So our ego is our own personal kind of like interface with this world. I'm using interface in a very technical way because like recently over the past 2 years I started understanding more the strength of the English language and the depth of utility behind it, specifically because like I started studying programming, and to do that you have to understand documentation because all they're doing is using words to explain concepts. And naming is key. One of the longest going jokes in like programming is the fact that like you are the hardest thing to do is basically to name a variable and to center a div, which is to center something at the center of the screen. Because like while programming, you see websites that are pure and clean. A lot of frustration went into that. But egoists versus egotists. I say the ego needs to be built. But then what's the difference between me building the ego or the environment affecting me in a way that builds my ego? And that's where anytime we look at how sometimes people kind of like are very much reactive, it's because their environment caused them to develop certain characteristics that are embodied in their ego. The personality is always good, man. People genuinely are good at heart. The evil behind people, I think, is very much man-made. But if I were to express how I would be building, it's the intention that I'm putting into it. And then my ego, slow but steady, kind of like would grow towards the intention that I want out of this life in order to be the person, in order to be the interface that interacts with this life. Now, what's the difference between an egoist and an egotist? Well, fundamentally, at the core, these two words are this. I'm going to read from a website. An egoist An egoist is an individual who prioritizes their own self interest and personal well being above all else. This is a philosophical concept. And it really asserts that everyone should act in a way that maximizes their own happiness. And hey, if I choose that my happiness is everyone else's happiness, then that's the kind of ego I have. Fair? And satisfaction and all that stuff. They will always kind of mention that regardless of others, because like in this world, if you want to like do whatever you want, regardless of others, that's you being egocentric. But then egotist, on the other hand, is an individual who possesses an excessive and exaggerated sense of self-importance. So an egotist is a person who's thriving on that image instead of actually being that person. So you're not really a person that has that strong ego. You're just a person that's thriving on an image you created. So you're an egotist. That difference, the best way I could explain it, man, is the ego is real. To be an egoist means you yourself are building yourself towards exactly what you want, not considering what others do, how feel, all that stuff. Buddhists are very much egocentric. In their quest to destroy the ego, what they've effectively done is develop the ego of a guru. Now, the ego of a guru is one of those responsive ones, one of those like understanding ones, one of those like let go ones, but it's still very much an interface you're representing, you're working with. When I'm talking to him, I'm talking to the simplest form of his existence, maybe, or maybe something more complicated because they take a lot more years to get to where they are. It's a whole lot of work. And even though maybe the way they say it is dismantling, effectively, what their effort in dismantling the ego creates something that's actually strong enough to dismantle what used to be there, which could only be countered by something that is now, which is another ego. Whilst an egotist kind of chase an image, build on top of something that's not really ingrained in who they truly are. And what they effectively do is they kind of start constructing that sense of I don't know, that sense of attention, that sense of admiration, maybe recognition that they crave for or they want, or just that's how they choose to live their lives. And instead of like doing the work in order to build their ego for them to like automatically get that attention, they do the work to get that attention in order for them to kind of for that to be reflected on them. So both these things have egos involved in them. But an egoist is a person that focuses on their ego and what they want out of this life and what they want out of their own self that needs to be represented by themselves in this life. Whilst an egotist is somebody that instead of doing the work, instead of looking at themselves strong and hard and deciding what kind of person they want to be as an interface with the world, with society, they chase an image only to get so basically what they're getting is the second-hand results of having an ego that's strong, of being an egoist. What they're getting is the side attention. Have you ever seen people that are craving something like this, that are like desperately trying, and they would lie and they would cheat and they would jump and they would like do more than normal in order to maintain a certain image of themselves among people? Normally, these people don't really have that much of a substance, and their entirety of their existence is built on top of that kind of scenario. I've even seen people talk negatively about themselves, even though they're actually good people and strong people. When they talk negatively about themselves, they reinforce that image, being egotistical about it. Well, the truth is, like, own up to your egocentricity, own up to your egoism, own up to the fact that you are doing what you want to do and you are living life the way you would want to live it. And it doesn't really matter how people's opinion of you are, as long as you're moral and true to yourself. Do what you have to do and enjoy what you have to, like, build your life the way you want to and build it in a way where you yourself find that structure. slow and steady, I would look at my ego and I would say, instead of it being impacted by everything around, because that's ultimately how we first become the people we are. And I point at the last videos, it's like interviews. They interviewed bigger people, older people, what they would want to change about themselves, and they were very much self-oriented: ears, eyes, hair, taller, strength, all that stuff. Well, when they asked children, they asked for like shark teeth and like all kinds of like cool stuff, bat wings and shit like this. And it's like our ego is there whether we like it or not. It has to be. It has to be. How much of us is in it? How much of us gave birth to it? Because if you're not the one building your ego, then everything around you is creating it and building it. And if you're the one that wants a certain impact, if you work on your ego, you'll get that impact. But if you work on that impact, then you're creating an ego that doesn't really like, you're just creating an ego to survive. And I really think the consistency of our approach with our intention towards this world is the way that where we kind of like build on top of each day how we want to get the things that we want to get out of life and to establish these things. All of these are the structures that we have the power to create. And I think being an egoist is a major part of those. And every once in a while, you test your ego to see if it's still doing its job. If not, then you have to break it. And you have to do something else with it, and you have to build on top of it, explore, create, and all these things. Thank you, guys.